Hello and welcome to AiTalks by IBM. My name is Paul Russell and we talk openly with customers, partners and colleagues about the modern digital organization and how AI, cloud and enterprise software is helping make real-world difference to our high streets, our workplaces, our factories and so much more. So settle down and let me hand over to our fantastic panel today.
Hello, I am Rebecca Calthorpe and I work within the IBM Sterling supply chain team here in the UK, and I'm really excited to have on the podcast with me today Blair Downs, Toby Mills and Kenton Turner. We will be discussing the importance of organisations having visibility of their inventory, how COVID-19 has highlighted the consumer demand to know more about their shipments, and how having the view of your inventory, especially in the last mile of delivery, could be a key differentiator against your competitors. Let's get started.
Thanks, Rebecca, and thanks for joining us, Toby and Kenton. This is a new format for us. We've all been on many webinars recently, but we're giving the podcast format a go. It's a bit more informal, skip the whole introduction piece for a start, plus we don't need to be wearing our smartest shirts in front of our best bookshelf either. We've been working together on this for a while, this whole inventory piece, and of course, we've all been living it to a degree as we're all consumers as well.
It's Kenton here. I'm kind of with you on that as being a consumer of the last mile recently as well. I'm hoping that a bit better visibility once we get past COVID means that I don't have to stay in and take the 9 parcel deliveries every day that hit my front door at the moment. If I know where that inventory may actually be at any given time, that might be quite interesting going forward.
I think visibility, certainly recently, I haven't heard the term visibility mentioned more in my sort of time in supply chain. Everywhere I look, LinkedIn, all of the kind of survey reports, a lot of the meetings that I'm involved in. And whereas before you used to have to sort of say, you know, we look at the topic of visibility, supply chain visibility, inventory visibility, and you'd have to then go into another dialogue and explain what that is and why it's important, etc. I think people are really kind of coming to terms with what this subject is, and the curiosity levels have peaked. One of the things that I'm very keen to get across is, whilst that curiosity level has peaked, I still think people are struggling or are grappling with 2 questions. How will visibility impact or improve my business? Exactly how? How can we create that business case that's going to generate, you know, the appetite and the investment to actually proceed with some of these next generation initiatives? And the second thing is, how do we do it? Answering those 2 questions, I think, is pretty critical for businesses, and they've got to do it in very short order.
It's a good point, actually, that people are starting to get, you know, even in the wider world as consumers, starting to get that understanding that the visibility sometimes just isn't there. You know, they can't see the stock, they can't see where they can pick it up, they can't pick up from store or whatever it is, get hold of the goods that they want. And one of the things that people are grappling with is you've got these multiple channels of inquiry, right? So you've basically got people who might be going into store, they might be phoning up, they could be on an e-commerce channel trying to secure, you know, apart from the delivery slot challenge, just actually finding out where that inventory is. Because if you haven't got visibility of that inventory, you just can't promise it. You know, retailers live and die on their ability to fulfill the promise that they make to their customers.
Why do you think inventory visibility has become such a hot topic? You know, it's not like it's a new thing, right? People like me have been rabbiting on about this for years and trying to get people to listen. And now all of a sudden, it's like a light switch has been flicked on inside boardrooms.
I think it's the COVID effect in that everybody's woken up to the fact that it's actually hitting them now. I mean, inside the industry, we're all fully aware of what visibility could deliver to ourselves and to our businesses, but it's never really hit us. But with COVID affecting the way the supply chains have worked, visibility is a core, key, fundamental part of that supply chain to mitigate some of the disruption that's been happening. But it's been hitting people.
I think it's also, we've seen an evolution also, and it's been different in different places. Even if you just take retail as a slice and look at that, you've got retailers who've traded very much on their ability to provide that visibility. We've got some big ones in the UK. They can tell you exactly when and where you can go and pick this item up and where it is, and, you know, have a very low miss rate on those promises. But then you've got other retailers who until now haven't really felt the pain, right? So for them, most of their shoppers will go into a store. Maybe it's more of an experience. It could be fashion retail, for example. If those customers can't go into the store and you don't have that visibility of the inventory, all of a sudden through COVID, you've suddenly reached this point where you realize, you know, this is actually becoming a problem. And it's a business continuity issue for these guys.
I assume by COVID, Kenton and Blair, you're sort of talking about this shift of consumer behavior, this almost forced and voluntary shift to online retail, online shopping. And that's the way how consumers are more and more interacting with brands and doing business. I suppose you could sort of say, if it's an online operation, it's much more process oriented. So, it's ones and noughts in terms of how much inventory you've got on hand, as opposed to in store, perhaps a human being can use their own intelligence and sort of, paper up the cracks, or what else is driving this? If you look at the kind of things that we're measuring and that we'll talk about, I'm sure later on in this podcast, the kind of KPIs that people use to sort of manage their inventory, we're not inventing new indicators to performance. We're talking about the same ones, but it's almost like the importance of those performance indicators has been heightened or more perhaps exposed because of the way we're doing business now.
And I think the way that people are working is exposing the issues in meeting those KPIs. So you've got lots of distributed nodes. And when I say nodes, I mean locations where you're storing that inventory. You could have warehouses, you could have stores. Now, if you're a pure play and you ship everything from a warehouse, COVID's probably been quite good for you, right? You haven't had to change anything. There's been no real adaptability needed to cope with it. But if you rely on a network of stores for most of your fulfillment, that's a big sudden impact. And getting a visibility across all of those different stores, what you've got in the warehouse, how do you meet the demand from various places? If you don't have that visibility, it's very, very difficult to do that and maintain a high level of customer promise. And to your point about KPIs there as well, the problem with not having that visibility is then as a retailer, you're relying on a greater level of safety stock. So the higher level of safety stock is there because you've got a lower level of confidence in your ability to meet that promise. But everybody knows that holding that level of stock is a cost to the business. That's just a static investment. It's cash just sitting there not being utilized. Now, if you had a better visibility of that inventory and therefore a greater level of confidence in your ability to meet that customer promise, you can start to lower that level of safety stock and release that cash, which can then be invested into other parts of the business as well, for example.
No, I agree. I think it's the change in the audience, the consumer not being able to get out and go and pick up stuff. It's driven the change to the online piece. And you're absolutely right, guys. If your business was born of the cloud of a single distribution center and networked out direct to end user consumers, then you probably haven't had that huge an impact. As Blair's saying, if you've got 600 stores and 2 distribution points, and that inventory in each of those stores is not visible, then that is dead stock, because you can't get in the store, you can't do anything with it, and you've got to ship everything out from factory. It's a crazy world. The visibility can make that all work very well. And in fact, it would actually facilitate something that would perhaps differentiate those local stores that were holding local stock. They could get their items to their consumers faster at that last mile point and actually be a competitive edge for them against the guy that's got a distribution center. So the online business versus the local business. But again, it's about visibility, and not only visibility, Blair, as you will well know, it's about the ability to act on that stuff and do the promising piece and actually make it viable.
There's a couple of interesting points in what you guys have just said there. I think there's two things. There's this very rapid transformation that certain businesses that have operated as perhaps brick and mortar stores for the last several decades, they're now having to switch to online and compete in the online world. So how does a brick and mortar chain of clothing retailers or DIY stores or whatever compete with Amazon? Well, the first thing you do is you convert your brick and mortar retail space, your walk-in retail space, into e-fulfillment centers. And by doing that, you've immediately almost got the better infrastructure than some of the largest online e-commerce players in the world, because you've got potentially a fulfillment center in every major city, and large towns. That's a fantastic power that some of these retailers can unlock. I was on a chat with a guy this morning who was saying, yeah, that's all well and good, but they've got to know unilaterally what's in and available within each one of these stores. So that visibility of inventory into a common single layer is absolutely critical to be able to almost unlock the power that these guys have got. It's the ace in their deck, right? The fact they've already got this footprint, they've already got the infrastructure there. You need to unlock that, and inventory visibility is one of those ways. The second interesting point that you just raised there was stockpiling. And that allows me to bring in Brexit, which is one of my favorite topics. but this is going to be huge, right? Because businesses are now having to say, right, we need to optimize the level of inventory we've got. Now, what do we mean by that? Well, we mean we've got enough to fulfill orders and demand, right? That's obvious. But we also don't want too much, because otherwise we've got balance sheet cash tied up in effectively dead money. It's just cash that's just it's not going to appreciate. It's only depreciating. You have to sell it. You're carrying the risk. So you need to have enough to fulfill demand. You need to have little enough so that you're freeing up as much balance sheet capital as you can, which can be spent driving your business. It can be spent on marketing. It can be spent on customer service initiatives or reward schemes or whatever. You're treating your staff to a wonderful Christmas party. It's cash that could be used better elsewhere. But you've also got to have resilience within your supply chain. And that's the driver behind this stockpiling thing that we're seeing at the moment, is what on earth is going to happen January 1st? And can I afford not to have that cash tied up in inventory? Because, the risk reward is quite dramatic. So I think they're two really important things. And then the final thing I'll chime in with is this shift to online. We talk about visibility in the context of knowing what's in each one of the physical sites. Well, obviously in transit visibility, which is obviously the Entopy angle, it helps and it works perfectly with the IBM solution to deliver that rounded piece. But I think that in transit visibility can be leveraged very much in the last mile. How do brick and mortar retailers differentiate themselves in this new way of trading? Well, I use the analogy of a startup versus one of the premium high street brands. I'm not going to name drop, but because that would be free advertising, right? But I'm going to throw in one of the premium high street brands. How do you differentiate? Before, they differentiated with their huge and wonderful stores, very nice and warm, perfectly laid out, encourage the customers to come into the store and stay in there for a long time. You've got your in-store assistants, etc. Well, that's going to drive the percentage of sale per footfall up, right? But how do you differentiate when you've just got the same tools as a startup? And I think the way is in transit visibility and communication. So I think that the visibility piece is very broad, and we're already extending the subject matter quite dramatically. But they would be my three key points, I suppose.
Yeah, and building on that piece about how you differentiate yourself, that ties in with changes in consumer behavior as well, right? So it's not only that adoption of online, but also people want that sort of instant gratification. When they decide they want something, they want it as soon as possible, right? Once you've made the decision. We used to see that in e-commerce particularly, it used to initially differentiate on price. It was always cheaper if you bought it online, even from the same retailer. Now, these days, the prices have pretty much evened out. The margins are getting narrower and narrower, of course, but people have expected that the price is not so much of a differentiator. But what's really differentiating now is the speed at which people can get it, right? So you've got your Amazon Prime offers where you can get it even same day now. And that can make all of the difference. So there's other stores in the UK, of course, as well, where you can reserve and collect within 15 minutes. If I can get that item now, particularly if it's a distress purchase, so it could be my washing machine's blown up or my Hoover's blown up or whatever it is, I'm going to pay a little bit more for that because I need it now. But that sort of behavior also creeps into other things that people, once they decide they want something, that's it, they want it now. And if you can get that visibility, promise that sale and get it to them as quickly as possible, you're more likely to capitalize on that demand. Because if you can't, people, they may just go to the retailer next door and pick it up.
If it's commodity product, they will go next door. They'll go to the nearest place with the best service. I think that in boardrooms all around the UK and Europe right now, people are thinking slightly differently about dead stock and overstocking and all this kind of stuff and what they've got in inventory around the different places. Because in my head, and I think in theirs as well, if they've got access to that inventory, it's no longer dead. It's distributed. You need to have more buffer stock or something like that. I think you had a different term for it, for Blair, but more buffer stock in there to support change and distress. So especially with Brexit coming, Toby, you know this very well, right? That there could be holdups at borders. In which case, how do I keep my service going? Well, I have a little bit more stock in the field, but it's not dead inventory. It's something that's active stock if the technology's there and we're using the right kind of pieces together. I also completely agree with you guys. It's that last mile. I think, Toby, it's the phrase you used earlier on, was around effectively supply chain is becoming a marketing tool for the last mile. And the more efficiency you can do there around communication, around visibility in transit, and have that kind of piece. And just lastly, to agree with Blair, which I don't always do, but I'm going to do this one, is that I think you're right. I think the days of go online and get it delivered next day are going to be gone. People want it in an hour or 2 hours. And the only way you're going to do that is if you move that inventory closer to the customer.
And also, just to go back to your previous point about it becoming a marketing tool or a way of driving sales, An example that I quite often use is recently there's been a couple of big console launches in the UK. Now, as usual, they sell out very, very quickly, and people are waiting for them to come back into stock. Now, you can go down to your local store that might stock these and ask them, and currently they might say, well, we've got a shipment coming in next week, come back in then. But there's nothing more that they can really do about it. But actually, if you give that not just the visibility, but actually the actionability earlier into the supply chain, and to Toby's point about in-transit inventory that's actually moving, once you've got that view, if you can start to reserve against that inventory that you know is going to arrive at your store or into your network of stores or whatever it is for a specific person, you can start to sell that before it's even arrived. And to go back to the KPIs we were talking about at the start of the call, that's going to have a really positive impact on KPIs like inventory turnover, which is you measure, how many times inventory has been sold and replaced during that specific time period. It's going to affect things like weeks on hand. All that money that you've got tied up in the inventory, you're releasing that cash as quickly as you possibly can, up to the point where you could have a replenishment run going into a store and everything on that truck could have already been sold by the time it arrives, right? And there's a queue of people just waiting to pick up their goods. And that's the kind of holy grail. But you can't get there unless you give people that visibility.
It's actually very good because if you're a consumer and you're going out for that game system, the ability to be able to say, okay, that's reserved for you. It will be here next Tuesday. It is yours. You haven't got to keep shopping around or pop back in to see if you're the first on the list. I like that.
I just wanted to ask a question before we go ahead and close out the podcast. I wanted to pose a question to you all. For our listeners, what would be the one key takeaway to think about after this podcast, now they've listened to it? Toby?
Listening to everyone's kind of contributions and my own personal view, I think the big thing that I would encourage people to take away, particularly if they're a brick and mortar retailer trying to transition into an e-com player, you already have a significant ace in your pack. You already have a huge advantage in the pre-existing, prepaid for infrastructure, i.e. your stores. Visibility and the technology that enables it is a way that you can really harness that advantage and use that as a real competitive advantage, enabling you to deliver to your customers more quickly and more regularly. And building on the visibility piece, you can also then start to provide the visibility from those brick and mortar stores to your customers, improving communication and leverage the supply chain as, arguably your biggest brand ambassador and marketing tool.
Blair?
Yeah, so for me, it's kind of a question to anybody who's selling. It's a good question for a retailer, I suppose, but anybody who's got goods coming in and selling goods out of their business. And the question is, can they see all of their inventory across the enterprise without the silos getting in the way? Because if you can then start to shorten that time to sell. If you can see things that are coming into your business that you are going to sell back out, and you can start to allocate those, you shorten that time to sell, you move all the inventory KPIs in the right direction. And for me, I think that's really one of the next big steps.
And finally, Kenton?
Yeah, thanks, Rebecca. I actually would throw it out a little bit further and say, imagine, if you will, that you do have that visibility that Blair talks about. And you can see all of your inventory in transit at this moment in time, in real time. What a difference would that make to your business? And start thinking about that. And if that business benefit is sufficient to get you interested, contact us and we can help you on the journey of how to get there.
And that is going to go ahead and conclude today's podcast. So thanks to you, Blair, Toby and Kenton, for joining our conversation on the AI podcast today. And also to our listeners, if any of our discussion has resonated with you and you'd like to hear more, there's a link to my LinkedIn profile in the description. Thanks very much to you all, and speak with you all soon.